Welcome to Natural Recovery from Suffering. This is Scott Killaby. Habits. We all have them. Label them as you will. Good, bad, neutral, helpful, unhelpful, healthy, unhealthy. We have habits. It's because of how we're conditioned to survive. If you look at it deeply, if you actually make the unconscious conscious, you see that our main habit is the habit of suffering, which is the suffering that you experience, produced by some very simple conditioning. I have to stay safe and get love. If you were to put words to it, it's what holds emotion back. We keep those emotions buried. That programming then drives us. And it's a habit of suffering because in order to stay safe and get love, we have to hold emotion back. Then we have to identify with what's false. There's our suffering. And then we try to create habits there at the conscious level to change the suffering, to make it better or worse. In any event, we have great difficulty because the main habit of suffering overrides it all. Repression is like gravity, I say. It's like it always wins. And so if you sort of try to do something at the surface, lose weight, change your habits around shopping, addiction, something, if that gets in the way of staying safe from the buried emotions and then getting love and approval, that's not going to work out. At the conscious level, you're not going to lose weight. You're not going to change that habit. But at the unconscious level, you will meet your goal 100%. In fact, at the unconscious level, we are constantly meeting our goals. Our habits are successful always because our habit is to stay safe and get love. That just happens to translate to suffering at the conscious level. It might sound crazy, it might resonate, but this is something you can discover in your own body. This isn't conjecture, it's not speculation, it's not a new theory. There's science that supports the fact that buried emotions is behind a lot of suffering, but you don't even need that. If you go into your own body, you'll see the mechanism. You just have to gain the skill to find it, and your system is conditioned so that you won't, so that the habit of suffering will continue. This is why I'm doing this podcast on habits, because when Dan and I brought the repression inquiry to people, I think there was a little bit of naivety on my part. So I think I just assumed, and maybe Dan too, that people would be able to pick up the repression inquiry and do it on a consistent basis each day to free themselves from suffering. But there was something going on with me and Dan that made it easy, you could say, or easier for us to process each day. You have to ask Dan what that is. He would answer it for you. But quite frankly, for me, it was chronic nerve pain. So I got immediate relief and therefore gratification through developing this work that would actually relieve my pain in the moment. That, of course, is one reason that I did it. It's actually a big reason, because that's how our system works. If we can find relief in some way, our system will just go back to that and even create a habit of going back to it. Now, that's a problem if we keep going back to something that also has a bypass in it. So if I kept going back to something that made me feel better and gave me relief, but also missed the root of suffering, well, that's not a good practice habit. Obviously, it's a bypass. But with the development of KI, it was totally different for me. It just seemed to all make sense that finally when I got to the root of suffering, after all those years of bypassing, that the relief would happen immediately, but also that there would be the second aspect of that, which is suffering itself goes away, not just immediate relief. So you could say that that's what became the two markers of KI. When you're doing repression inquiry, you look for these two markers. There's different ways to say them, but one marker is that you get relief. It's your own words, but some people will say it's safe. or my system feels at least somewhat more regulated by KI. And that's just safer to continue so that we don't resist it. And then the second marker is that it actually gets to the root of suffering, that it transmutes the dense energy in the body, where the sense of separation is, at least somewhat every time you do it. So there's two markers. You could say safe and effective. If somebody came here and they didn't have a spiritual background, I would have no problem saying, hey, this is like anything else you do out in the world. It needs to be safe and effective. But there's no agency that oversees safe and effective for spiritual practices. So we have to be really earnest and honest with each other and mature on a spiritual path to make sure both of those markers are there for you. And if they're not there, don't do KI. Stop. And go work with somebody like me or a mentor that can help you do it the way that it was developed, because the way it's developed is safe and it's effective. Now, if you don't like those words because you come from a different background, I'll just say it differently. It's like if you come from a spiritual background, it shows you the presence. There's the first one, because the relief that you get is, it's like grounds you more in the here and now, because repression has a way of bringing up identification, past. So as you do that work, you feel more grounded in the moment, you could say. And the second marker, which is the contraction, is transmuted, at least some in that. See, that's like a more spiritual way of saying it. The self-contraction or the sense of separation is transmuted. There's the second marker. There are other ways to say it, but it's experiential. So once you start looking for those two markers, that habit of seeing those two markers every day because you're skillful changes your life. Don't believe me, because it's just like a poor substitute for the actual experience. Learn the work the way that we've developed it. By getting the two markers, you'll see. And then, this may sound odd to you, but we put the two markers as officially part of the work in July of 2024, which we all voted for. There was even a notice and comment period where people could object to that and ask questions about that. Certified mentors could do that. And we all agreed that that should be part of the work, the two markers. So understand then, if you don't have the two markers, you stop, because the habit of suffering is winning. It's like gravity. It always wins. If you're not skillful. Now that you understand that, that's the habit that we want to form here. But we want this habit to be formed naturally. You don't even have to call it a habit. But it's coming back to the repression each day at the very unconscious level and processing that, instead of just the habit of suffering driving you. Because that habit has the most power. See that? It's driving you. The habit of inquiry is something you bring into that. But why would you want to bring inquiry into a pattern of suffering if you're getting something out of the suffering? From the unconscious level, I mean. And we're staying safe and we're getting love by suffering. So there has to be something that brings in the inquiry that matches, in some way, matches the power of the need to suffer. And that's where, to talk about habits comes in. What I did is, by getting pain relief, the first marker, I just kept coming back to repression inquiry. And then because the second marker was there, I was getting the freedom from the suffering itself. That's all you have to do, really. Many of you will hook up the practice of inquiry to something that you want to do every day. If you connect it to that, Dan connected it to porn. He didn't want to do that every day, but when he wanted to do that, his system started to learn to want to do inquiry with that, in the same way that my system, probably because he got relief, but you have to ask him, but also because he got clarity and he wasn't enslaved by that in the same way. In the same way I got clarity and I wasn't enslaved by the pain. It just brings such relief that I think that we were maybe lucky, or maybe just tuned in, you could say, to how KI was helping on two levels. It wasn't just giving us relief. It was our suffering was going away, transmuting. Now, where are you with it? Because the habit of suffering is so strong. If you haven't hooked inquiry into the habits of suffering, the habit of suffering is going to win. Why would you think that would change? Think about that for a moment. If I'm right about this, just energetically, that the habit of separation is the strongest one, then why would you think that just because you want to be free, that you would be able to bring inquiry into all those areas? If you really understood trauma, you would probably approach it differently. You would see or come to understand that you're driven by the need to stay safe and get love, essentially, and that that's the habit running you. And then you might find little things that you already like to do, or that your system goes to as a habit, and because you already go there, you just tack on or stack on the habit of inquiry. Same thing that I did and Dan did when we first developed it. See, I wanted pain relief. I already wanted that, and my system was okay with finding that. So I got that relief through the repression inquiry itself. Therefore, I just also got the second marker, which means the whole thing went away over a process. And Dan would say a similar thing. But even if you can't find it, I mean, everybody can find it. If you have persistent depression, you can actually find relief from that each day until it just goes away. Why wouldn't you if you're getting to the emotional repression that creates it? But the issue is not that, it's the habit of inquiry, and how it, in some ways, it's no match for the habit of suffering. Because even though we say we want suffering to go away, the reason it keeps coming is because of the benefit that it gives us. Staying safe and getting love. Even depression, that keeps us safe. It's safer than feeling and expressing buried anger, for example, to the system. So, but you can use KI to get relief from that each day. And you're reaching maybe to something else already, like medication or something. Why not get it through KI also, and then experience the second marker, which is the transmuting of the repression that creates that depression at the surface. It seems to me it would be the same thing, the same way that I treated my chronic pain. The immediate relief that you would get would bring you back to the inquiry on depression each day. But I think that what's really making people struggle is they don't stack that inquiry habit on for a while. They don't learn the skill, and so as the depression comes up, they don't do the inquiry. If they did it just like a minute or two, each time they felt depressed, they would create this natural habit, and their system would just want to come back to it, to the inquiry, instead of just coming back only to depression. Same with anxiety. If anxiety is really a form of suffering that you're earnestly interested in getting to the root of, all you have to do is stack that inquiry process onto the anxiety each day, 2 minutes at a time or more. Make sure it's skillful, but watch the anxiety go down. Feel the relief. And then that teaches your system to come back to it. But if you're skillful, you're actually transmuting the buried emotions that create the anxiety. That helps you for tomorrow. That transforms you, that second marker. So get relief, but transform. There's 2 markers there. If you have a body contraction or chronic pain, it's a gift. Even though it sucks, I lived with it. It's a gift because you can just create this natural habit of getting natural pain relief by getting to the root of suffering. Once you create that habit of getting that relief, you're getting that second marker, which is the clearing of that repression that not only creates the chronic pain, but of a lot of other things in your life. For example, we're blessed with like diseases and chronic pain and addiction for one reason, is that that allows us to see the suffering throughout our life. That's all coming from the same repression. Come and work with me and you'll see that, well, I have this new 90-day intensive mentoring and coaching program where we just dive deep into this, the habit of inquiry against the habit of suffering, and how to bring the habit of inquiry naturally into that. And that takes a higher level of support if you're going to get really serious about that, like really ending suffering. I wanted to, when I first started teaching, just point to presence. But that's silly because, yeah, we can point to presence, but I had 2 diseases coming. I needed to end suffering before I truly helped people. And now that I've stepped into my authenticity, the only authentic way that I really feel I can help people is, let's get to know each other. Because this is a real intimate human thing, how we seek safety and love instead of freedom. We seek getting love, in other words, instead of being free and being love. That's a thing that, I don't know, to me that's a really intimate thing. And when I can get to know you and I can let you see me, and that's how I'm going to do this program, that's how I'm doing it with people, is you get to see all of me. And hopefully when you feel safe, I get to see all or most of you, and then we see it all. And everything's on the table. And we look at little habits that you have, even if it's a habit of like, I don't want to reach out to Scott because of the avoidance or the repression. We're going to take that habit and give you a way of stacking inquiry into that so that it becomes easy for you to reach out. And then once you reach out, because I'm already here in this space of being open, that's where the magic happens, because then we can look, once our relationship is open and you're working through any avoidance, disconnection, sabotage with me, that extrapolates out quite naturally to all your other relationships. Because this work catches us in our habit of suffering. And it's a very gentle, loving thing that we do for ourselves. But at the very core of it is this frozen fear. So that's what scares us. It's natural and okay that it scares us. But that's what we work with, is that fear of being ourselves. And that's why creating a good inquiry habit is so loving and intimate, because it's good to have somebody there too, to go through that process with you. I never had that. And I really kind of regret that. I feel kind of left out. I mean, I was developing the work and I just didn't have a mentor to help me through a lot of the pitfalls. But now you have that. Not only do you have a mentor, you have several of us. We have a really good way of helping people map out and see their own consciousness and how it's working to produce suffering. But to let somebody into that, that's the thing that has been challenging for me, is to understand that repression just makes it hard for people to let somebody in and to be seen. But if you can understand that that's the very mechanism that creates your suffering in every relationship, there might be something that makes you want to step towards me and come talk to me, because to catch yourself in this, the habit of suffering, it's just everything. To end suffering is magical. I've never said that before because I never ended suffering. In the first 10 years of teaching, I didn't know how. And that's what I want to show you, is how. There's a way, actually, because you're creating it. But we just have to step through like some initial veils of resistance or landing or belief systems that tell us things that aren't true. Like, for example, that we can have a one-time experience or shift and be done with all suffering. Because there's just no evidence for that. It's actually rare that that happens. And that most people are actually unconsciously producing their suffering and getting a benefit from it. That's more accurate, actually, that at the unconscious level we have no interest in truly being free. that can send people to some crazy places. If that veil remains there, like a refusal to see how one is creating their own suffering and benefiting, that the seeking for an experience is a way out of taking responsibility for that. As if, you had better hope that that one experience shows you something about how you create suffering, because then you'll keep creating it if you don't see that. Recognizing that there's awareness everywhere doesn't necessarily show you that at the unconscious level more suffering is coming. So what I want to show you is not only how presence is foundational, I'm going to show you how to bring that into your life in this new program. One thing that's been difficult for me is to work with people in a limited time frame. Only so much per week, and yet the gift of freedom is so broad and infuses every area, or infiltrates every area of your life, every cell of your being. It's so important to treat that with the highest priority. And I couldn't spend the time that I needed, not only helping people with the skill of repression inquiry, but also showing them how important it is to notice that at the ground of our experience is just this presence. I spent many years pointing to presence and ignoring buried emotions. And then I wanted to spend my time with people pointing to buried emotions, because that's how you end suffering. But the other piece of that is that when you end suffering, you're opening to what you really are. This is important. This is something that we missed when we were kids. That this isn't just about processing issues. This is actually getting to the root of suffering and getting the fundamental need met that was never met. I sat in this interesting position of looking at how child development happens and how I developed the habit of suffering. And I found it in my own experience, in direct experience, how it happens. So, I know that you had parents who were unconscious. You have trauma too. So you may not know right now how you had to create suffering to stay safe from what you've buried and from your parents or whoever else, but also to get their love and approval. I'm somebody who doesn't need I don't need your love and approval. And it's not about you getting that from me. This is something deeper than that. If you come here looking for love and approval only, or staying safe, this is a repeat of the trauma of your past. But if you treat this mentoring and coaching as an opportunity to discover the fundamental need that your parents could not that I'm not your parent, of course. I'm not reparenting you. But as somebody who has seen all that now, I can stand in your life and say, this is what they never showed you. And it's right here. They didn't have the nervous system, the capacity to show you that. My parents didn't either. But I have the capacity, I've experienced that, of what it would be like to have developed into authentic being. It took me not just the initial shift into presence, but the embodiment of that to see this. That when you bring whatever you bring to me, I don't know you. I can't tell you how to live your life. I'll coach you in different ways for sure, but this is about you owning your experience in a way that you never got a chance to when you were a kid. So instead of being the authority in your life, that would be a re-traumatization. I'm going to be the kind of authority that gives you back your authority. Well, you never got it. I mean, that's part of not getting the fundamental need met. The fundamental need is recognizing the awareness that you are and then being able to allow it all. I want to show you both aspects of that. I'm just telling you that you can't allow it all if you have buried emotions. So we're going to be focusing there mostly, but we're also going to be in this one-on-one pointing to and talking about the awareness recognition, waking up to that. So I've brought all these components in together finally in a way that I couldn't do in the past. As a teacher who toured around as we do, you know, you can point to presence, but you can't follow up with people. There's no real connection. And the pointing to presence often misses the trauma. It's a bypass. It wasn't a great way to teach. Also, just focusing on repression inquiry and not the awareness was a better way to teach. But it didn't really meet people because my experience is both the awareness, the awakening, and the processing of those buried emotions. So to really meet people in my experience, I needed to do away with everything I was doing in the past and create new habits, as you can see. So I consistently post on social media. I'm also changing what I do, creating a different program that works for me, because the only thing that actually feels right to me is to share from my experience. And my experience is both repression inquiry, but it's also the presence that I've lived as for years. And that has to happen here. I'll tell you why. We can't just process our stuff. We have to also recognize that the ground of being, this is what we really are. This is what we missed when we were kids. Only awareness can hold the buried parts of you. Nothing else can. The stories that come up for you, that's not what you are, and they can't hold those buried emotions. Those buried emotions create those stories and identities. So the person here who's not good enough cannot be free and cannot reverse repression. That identity will go. What you really are is the awakeness. And you'll see that with regard to every identity if you're in this program with me and you stay in KI and follow through with the process. No promises about being done with suffering by 90 days, but I'll tell you what, I'm reducing the number of people that I work with. This is a habit of getting clearer and doing what I want, setting boundaries, being an authentic helper instead of a people pleaser. And I can tell you this is what I want, because even if I work with fewer people, I'm going to choose the people that I want to work with. That's a wide range of people, but there'll be some people who it just won't be a good fit. I'll tell you that now before I invite you here to work with me. It's not a good fit if you are just really new to awakening and you're kind of in that place where you're just looking for that experience or that shift to awakening. There has to be some earnestness to also process the thing that creates your suffering. The awakening, the awareness won't end your suffering. I don't want to focus only on that. It's a bypass. Also, if you're someone who is really convinced that identity in some way is the core, but you're still open to see that it's not, it's actually repression, come work with me. But if you have really strong positioning around this stuff, or certain spiritual positioning, which makes you kind of almost constitutionally unable to get to buried emotions because you have a spiritual resume, or you're a teacher. I swear, teachers are sometimes the worst students. We are. I mean, if you're a helper out there, you've got to be open before you come work with me. That's a class of people right there that I have to speak to publicly, because you guys tend to come work with me. But you've got to give up your addiction to love and approval. You have to give that up. You have to be really earnest about that to come and work here, because usually people will come work here and they'll want to be certified. But I don't want to attract a bunch of people who are teachers and helpers in this 90-day program if they're just trying to get certified after that to go help people and get love and approval. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true. I don't want to work with those people. I've seen it too much. We teachers and helpers and therapists can be so eager to help people that we just don't do our own work. And I just don't want to rubber stamp that. But if you're a helper or a teacher and you're actually self-reflective, you actually know that you still have unconscious stuff and you're really open, come work with me. You might even, get into the training program to become a certified mentor here. I'm so glad that I just said that, because in the past, I think I've attracted a lot of helpers, teachers, therapists, and coaches. Please come. Please be open. I had to be really open to see that I was still suffering. And diseases are included, chronic pain, any kind of lack of authenticity in your teaching or in your relationships or your therapy would have to be put on the chopping block. I have to say that because you're the worst student sometimes. But if you're open, come. What I'm really looking for are the people who are suffering out there. Doesn't matter whether you're a teacher or a coach or just anyone. It's the suffering that often makes us earnest. And what you do with it. I'm looking for the people who have some inkling or want to understand this, that both the suffering and often our response to the suffering to alleviate it, they're all coming from the same repression. And so a lot of our modalities, as you can see, as you try different things out there, when you're suffering, there's a pattern that comes. I call it the avoidant spiritual path. I'm actually looking for those people because there's a group of earnest people out there who just don't want to avoid anymore, but they don't have the answer. Like they're in different modalities and they know that their work is to look at themselves. They just haven't found the right modality. Those are the people that I want to talk to. Because sometimes when you've done enough work, you've just seen that you're just missing something. And you just need better skills. You're not trying to get out there necessarily and help other people. You're earnestly here for yourself. Those are the best people to work with. And you are often the ones that I'll invite into training because you came here earnestly. So please come talk to me. And just as a footnote, if you're a teacher or a helper, I don't want anything that I said to keep you. This is not, I don't have energy on this. This is me being able to speak freely. I welcome you too, but it would be better if you're a teacher or a helper that you too somehow see your own avoidance and that you come here for that. And sometimes teaching and helping is a form of avoidance. Quite often it is. You got to be open to look at that. If you are, come talk to me. If you're interested, I put some links here. Just check them out. And mostly there really are not services. There's a session that you can get with me. But you can see I'm in this exploratory phase where I just want to invite people to come talk to me to see if it's a good fit for this new program. I'll tell you all about it. Check the link